Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to really get into some fascinating sources and pull out the key insights for you. Today we're looking at an ancient text, Micah chapter 2, but wow, does it feel relevant now? Our source material really throws us into this tension right from the start. It's about human plans, all meticulously laid out, crashing against, well, God's bigger plan, and it gets pretty intense fast.
It really does. Micah gives us this incredible window into ambition, justice, and what happens when things go off track, when choices, personal or societal, stray from these core principles. So our mission, if you like, is to pull out those insights from Micah's prophecy. We're looking at the consequences when people ignore the foundations and what these ancient words might actually mean for us today.
Okay, let's get into it then. Micah starts with, well, it's pretty confronting. He talks about people who literally, and this is a quote, think up evil and plan wickedness as they lie in bed. Just imagine that. Spending your night scheming how to basically rip off your neighbor. And the text is blunt, calls it evil. This isn't some accident, it's planned.
And what's really striking and quite profound is what comes next in verse 1. When morning comes, they do it, since they have it in their power. Now, that phrase, in their power, it's not about them being righteous or strong. It points to something else, a kind of divine allowance. God, in his sovereignty, sometimes permits these wicked plans to play out for a time only he knows, really. It relates to free will. It's definitely not God approving of it, but more like allowing the natural consequences of those choices to unfold for a period. It makes you think about free will versus God's control, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And the plans themselves, they're specific. And frankly, they're brutal. Micah 2.2 lays it out. They covet fields and seize them. They take over houses as well, doing violence to both owner and house, to people and their inherited land. So this isn't just envy. It's violent theft, dispossession.
Right. And this is where understanding the background is so important. Seizing land like that, it flew directly in the face of God's law, specifically the rules around the year of Jubilee. You find that in Leviticus 25. For anyone maybe not familiar, the Jubilee year, every 50 years, was designed so that inherited land would return to the original family if it had been sold because of poverty. It was a safety net. It was supposed to stop families from being permanently poor and prevent all the wealth ending up in a few hands. Micah's showing the rich just trampling over the poor, ignoring this fundamental principle of justice.
It's deeper than just greed. It's like they're actively dismantling the safety nets, ignoring God's own instructions. It makes you wonder, this ancient greed, taking land, homes, what does it tell us about, well, us? About pursuing wealth even when it hurts others.
Yeah.
It feels disturbingly familiar somehow.
It really does resonate. And naturally, this leads straight to the consequences. In Micah 2.3, Adonai, that's Lord or God, he says, against this family I am planning an evil. The text explains it clearly. The people had basically put their own plans above God's plan for them. And the root, pride. Simple, dangerous pride, thinking, our way is better than God's way. But this defiance, this disobedience, God says he'll only allow it for a certain period of time. Then comes judgment, and all that wealth they grabbed, it wouldn't save them, they'd be humbled. Our source draws a direct line, saying the same type of thing is happening in many areas of life today, people making themselves their own God. But it also warns that this, too, will only be allowed for a certain period of time before judgment is dealt.
So definitely not random bad luck. It's a planned response from God. And the impact described in Micah 2.4 is just shattering. The people sing a dirge, a funeral song, basically. They're crying out, we are completely ruined. Our people's land has changed hands. Our fields are taken away. He parcels them out. Their inheritance, gone. Taken from everyone, rich and poor, given to foreigners. Assyria in that case.
But here's the crucial bit. Even in that despair, the text says, they recognize that it is God who is doing this. And that points to, well, a difficult purpose behind God's judgment. To get people to see him for who he is. It's not just punishment, it's a wake-up call. A harsh one, yes, but meant to bring them back to recognizing his authority.
And the finality of it all hits home in Micah 2.5. You will have no one in the assembly of Adonai to stretch out a measuring line and restore the land assigned by lot. This isn't just losing a battle, it's being kicked out. Removed from the promised land entirely because, as the text says, they had abandoned God's plan for the land. Total loss of inheritance, a direct result.
Yeah, it really underscores that idea that God is in control and he put its people in the places that serve his purpose. It's fascinating and sobering how clearly the text connects that pride, that dismissal of God's way, to these utterly devastating outcomes. It really makes you ask, doesn't it? How often do we maybe subtly, maybe not so subtly, put our own clever ideas or immediate wants ahead of what's truly right, assuming our status or money or smarts will somehow protect us from the consequences?
That's a heavy question. because the next part shows people actively fighting against the truth. Micah 2.6, the prophet tries to speak and people shout him down. Don't preach, they yell. They shouldn't preach about these things. Shame will not overtake us. Our source material says Micah was actually confronted by hired prophets, basically paid to tell him to keep his mouth shut.
Right. Prophets who only wanted to tell the leaders what they wanted to hear. It's an old story, sadly. The source makes a direct comparison to many so-called pastors and prophets today who might avoid the hard truths of Scripture because, well, it is not popular. And the source suggests often, if the message is not popular, the people will not come and put their money in the collection plate. It's a disturbing thought, isn't it? How easily truth can be traded for comfort or cash.
And Micah's response in 2.7 is so powerful. He asks, is this what the house of Jacob says? Has Adonai grown impatient? Are these his doings? He's questioning their whole understanding of God's character, his justice. And the answer that comes through is sharp. They would acknowledge that God blessed, but they did not want to hear that God also judges. It's that age-old question, isn't it? Would a loving God really punish?
Exactly. And God's answer, as our source interprets it, is pretty straightforward. Just as he brings blessing to those who obey him, it is only right that those who chase after their own plans are judged. It insists on a divine justice that holds both blessing and accountability in balance, something many people would rather not think about.
But then the accusations get really specific about how they treat people day to day. Micah 2.8 and 9 pull no punches. But lately my people behave like an enemy, stripping both cloaks and tunics from travelers. And you throw my people's women out of the homes they love. You deprive their children of my glory forever. Our source highlights that these charges all deal with the rich taking from the poor. It's brutal exploitation.
It's just a devastating picture of a community that was supposed to be, well, different. God intended them to be a loving community, looking out for the vulnerable, especially women and children. But they'd completely turned their backs on that. God literally says they're acting like enemies of his. It immediately makes you think of Jesus, right? When asked about the greatest commandment, love God, yes, but the second part, love your neighbor as yourself. The connection here is unavoidable. You can't truly love God if you don't love his people. How you treat your neighbor shows everything.
So, okay, what's the takeaway here? This idea that claiming to love God is meaningless if you're not actively loving your neighbor is a huge challenge. Especially when the text shows God's own people acting like enemies, it really forces us to look hard at our own actions. Do our private beliefs actually line up with how we treat people, especially those who are struggling?
And the consequences kept coming. Micah 2.6 is just chilling. Get up and go. You can't stay here because the land is now unclean. It will destroy you with a grievous destruction. The very land God gave them as a resting place after, 40 years in the desert, it wasn't their home anymore. Why? Because they had abandoned his principles, the land was defiled and no longer theirs. Physical expulsion because of spiritual pollution.
And in that corrupted state, what kind of message did they want to hear? Micah 2.11 paints this really cynical picture. If a man who walks in wind and falsehood tells this lie, I will preach to you of how good it is to drink wine and strong liquor, this people will accept him as their preacher. Basically, our source says they'd listen to anyone promising more wealth because wine and beer were a sign of wealth. The rich just cared about getting richer.
Yeah, they were not affected by the struggles of the poor, just completely indifferent. Our source connects this to Revelation 6.6, the vision where the poor struggle for food while the rich sip their wine, and it hammers the point home. That is not loving your neighbor, which Jesus said was so important. It's this deep moral blindness, fueled by greed, willing to accept lies if they promise prosperity.
But then, right in the middle of all this darkness, Micah 2.1 offers this sudden, powerful ray of hope, a promise. I will assemble all of Jacob. I will gather the remnant of Israel.
Ah, yes, the remnant. This is such a crucial concept throughout Scripture. Think of it like saving the best seeds from a crop that mostly failed. A smaller group, yes, but chosen. Preserved by God to carry his plan forward, even when most have gone astray. And this isn't just about history, about bringing some people back from exile. Our source reminds us that God also promised a remnant in the last days, people saved through faith in Jesus Christ, like we see in Revelation 7. So even when things look bleak, this idea of the remnant offers hope. It makes you think, doesn't it? How does this apply today or in tough times throughout history, when it feels like core values are collapsing, yet somehow a faithful group remains?
And that leads perfectly into the final verse, Micah 2.13, which unveils the ultimate hope for this remnant. The one breaking through went up before them. They broke through, passed the gate, and went out. Their king passed on before them. Adonai was leading them. Our source notes there are three powerful names or descriptions for the Messiah right there. The one breaking through, their king, and Adonai leading them. The number three often linked to God's action on earth.
Exactly. This verse points straight to God's ultimate plan. The one breaking through, that's Jesus Christ. He broke open the way to salvation with his death on the cross. He passed through the gate between earth and heaven, ahead of everyone with his resurrection, and he'll lead as king during the millennial reign and forevermore. God's plan for this remnant, and really for everyone, is acceptance of Jesus as Messiah.
Now, this is where the source gets really interesting, connecting this ancient text to things happening, well, now. It talks about the modern movement these days to get the Jews back to the land of Israel. And it acknowledges, yes, that's a good thing, as God specifically gave the land to them. But then it points out a potential issue, a flaw in some of the thinking around this.
Right. The source says the only problem is that many believe that getting them to the land is all that is required, that there's no thought of sharing the gospel with them, some even saying it doesn't matter because they will all be saved just by being there. But our source argues that view is contrary to what we see in this verse and sounds like the work of those false prophets Micah warned about. It clarifies the remnant brought back into the land after the exile in ancient times wasn't automatically saved just by returning. Salvation depended then, as now, on encountering the gospel, on faith, which became fully available after Jesus' death and resurrection.
Wow. Okay, so this really pulls it all together, doesn't it? Ancient words speaking directly to modern movements and beliefs. It challenges assumptions about what salvation really means. It's not just about geography or heritage. We really covered a lot, Micah chapter 2. It lays bare that clash between human pride, human plans fueled by greed, and God's overarching just plan. We saw the harsh consequences of abandoning principles, of trying to silence truth, but also that enduring hope found in the Messiah and the promise of a faithful remnant.
It's truly timeless stuff. Micah speaks to these enduring human failings, greed, pride, injustice, but also to God's enduring principles, justice, community, his ultimate sovereignty. It really pushes us to examine our own hearts, our own priorities. Our plans truly aligned with something deeper, something more just.
So, thinking about all this valuing wealth over people, pushing away hard truths, here's something to chew on. What plans in our own lives or maybe in our society today might be subtly or not so subtly pulling us off course? And what does loving your neighbor look like practically right now in a world pulling us in a million different directions? Definitely something to think about long after we wrap up here.